1 second. Okay. So the bottom line here is what Leader Murray is Ranking Member Murray is doing is very simple. If you want to fund TSA, if you want to fund all of the agencies in Homeland Security except ICE and CPB, this is the way to do it. Don't object, and it'll all happen. I don't want to hear any complaints from Republicans about TSA not being funded if they block this today. I don't want to hear any complaints from Republicans about Coast Guard not being funded if they block this today. I don't want to hear any complaints from Republicans about cybersecurity and CISA if they block this today. The bottom line is very simple. There's a simple way to get this all done. Of course, had the Republicans agreed to very simple things to do with ICE and with Border Patrol, things that every police department does, show identity, use warrants before you bust in on somebody's house, we could get this done and get everything funded. But the bottom line is they refused, probably because the right wing doesn't like it. So then, let's fund everything else but ICE and Border Patrol. The bottom line is simple. We should not hold other agencies hostage. The Republicans should not hold other agencies hostage, millions of Americans hostage, because of their extreme positions on ICE, because they're backing up the kind of brutality that we have seen. We don't need hostages. We don't need any of that. The bottom line is very simple. ICE won't change with the new DHS secretary. That's not going to be an excuse we can accept. You can't fix a rotting house with a fresh coat of paint. So we demand legislation. But until we get that legislation, we can fund everything else. Democrats are ready to pay TSA agents today. Democrats are ready to support the Coast Guard today. Democrats are ready to fund FEMA today. And only the Republicans blocking it stops it. And if they think the American people won't understand this, they're sadly mistaken. They know the administration's in charge of TSA, of Coast Guard, of FEMA. They know if there's no funding, it's because the administration isn't funding them. But we can overcome the administration with this legislation. And so, if Republicans claim they're worried about the Coast Guard, if they're worried, Republicans claim they're worried about TSA and FEMA, they can't be too worried because they're blocking it right now. I urge my colleagues on the Republican side, let this sensible, moderate, thoughtful legislation go through. Let's fund TSA, let's fund Coast Guard, let's fund FEMA, let's fund CISA, and not hold them hostage till an agreement on ICE and Border Patrol is reached. I yield the floor.
Minority Whip.
Mr. President, following the leader's remarks, I want to make an additional point. This is not the first time we have made this offer to the Republicans. On the floor of the United States Senate and the House, they keep notes of everything that is said. This young lady is a stenographer, and she keeps these notes together and creates a record literally known as the congressional record that is passed out every single day to members to read what happened the day before. I took a look at this congressional record for March 5th, that was last Thursday, on page S-870, and it contains a debate between Senator Patty Murray, the Democratic ranking member in the Appropriations Committee, and the junior senator, Republican senator from the state of Alabama. An offer was made on that page by Senator Murray to do exactly what the leader just said. This was last week. Last week, Senator Murray said, let's narrow this down to the items of debate and contention, the future of ICE and the future of the Border Patrol. But let's fund everything else in that agency. So there's no question that the men and women who work with TSA at the airports are going to be paid on time. The Coast Guard will be paid on time. And the other agencies that are other separate and apart will also be paid on time. She made this offer on page S870, and there was an objection. Under the rules of the Senate, it just takes one senator to object. But the senator, junior senator from Alabama, speaking on behalf of the Republican side, objected to funding all of the rest of this department, save two specific agencies. She objected to it, so she had her chance last Thursday. We're going to give the Republicans another chance. We've been told that TSA is about to miss a paycheck. Think of the thousands and thousands of men and women who work in the airports to keep us safe and whether they should receive a paycheck. We think they should, and that's why Senator Murray is going to make that offer today. I hope the Republicans will cooperate this day in a way they didn't last week. It's been nearly a month since this shutdown started. Already, it's the third shutdown of President Trump's second term, the third time. Why? Because the White House and my Republican colleagues refused to consider reforms on ICE. Did you see the videos of what happened in Minneapolis? In your own eyes, you don't need my interpretation. You saw what happened to people there protesting the activities of ICE who ended up being shot and killed on the streets of Minneapolis. Is that something that we signed up for when we started this deportation effort? Remember what the president said over and over again? We're going after the worst of the worst. Terrorists, murderers, rapists, the criminally insane who snuck up across our border in the past several years. We're going to go and arrest them. Well, I'll tell you this, sign me up for that mission. We want to make sure our streets are safe, and if someone is here illegally, commits a serious crime, they go to jail or they get out of the country. Two choices. That's a bipartisan feeling. But they've gone further. Take a look at the actual record of ICE and the Border Patrol in this mission that they have of mass deportation that has been ordered by Stephen Miller, the president's deputy chief of staff. 6 out of 7 of the people who have been arrested and detained and moved to different locations by ICE and CBP were people who had no criminal record. None. Not one. 6 out of 7. What kind of law enforcement operation is that that gets 6 innocent people for every person who's guilty? Something's wrong here. We've got to change it. And some basic questions. Would you want the door of your house to be crashed down? Of course not. And if you did, you'd think it better be for good reason if the government's going to do that to my home and my family. And that requires the court to give approval to it to happen. It's called a judicial warrant, except the ICE agents believe they're not bound by that law. They can crash down a door if they wish, and they've done it over and over and over again. Do you think that's right? I don't. It's one of the issues we want to debate with them. And when it comes to the mask that they're wearing, I talked to law enforcement back in my home state of Illinois. How many of our state troopers wear a mask to work every day? None. How many of the Chicago policemen wear a mask every day? None. What it comes down to is we're pushing for good police practices that are applied in communities all across America. Somehow or another, the ICE agents think they're exceptional. They don't have to identify themselves and they can wear a mask. I think that's wrong. And when it comes to their jurisdiction, it's an esoteric legal question, but it's an important one. How far can the Border Patrol go beyond the border to enforce the law? They believe under this administration, they can go anywhere in the United States. Previous administrations believe that the statutes have restrained where they can go. These are fundamental questions that relate to the Constitution, to the Bill of Rights, and to the laws in this land. We want to make sure that they're followed, and that's why we're negotiating the future of ICE and Border Patrol. But today, Senator Murray is going to give notice again. We are prepared to fund every other aspect of the Department of Homeland Security. That is something that I think is fair and should go forward. The Republicans opposed it last week. I hope that they'll support us this week. The men and women of TSA should not be held hostage, to our negotiation. Let's get serious about getting all the negotiation done, but in the meantime, let's fund the agencies that are critical in this department. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Senator Washington.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, right now, TSA agents are going without pay because Republicans and the White House have decided they would rather shut down all of DHS than pass some very basic reforms to rein in ICE and Border Patrol. For weeks on end, Democrats have been very crystal clear about what measures need to be put in place before a full DHS bill can pass. These are steps that the American people are demanding and that local police departments across the country already follow. And we've also been clear that when it comes to reining in these out-of-control agencies and preventing more Americans from being shot and killed by masked federal agents, half steps are not going to cut it. But Republicans are acting like they have no idea what the problem is or what Democrats and what the American people are demanding here. And now Republicans are not only dragging their feet on the basic reforms, they are refusing to fund TSA and FEMA and other important DHS functions while these negotiations continue. Now, Mr. President, in my view, that's just plain wrong. If Republicans are going to drag their feet on common sense reforms to protect their own constituents from having their door broken in by masked federal agents without so much as a warrant, then they should, at a minimum, work with us to make sure that TSA is funded. At minimum, we should make sure that disaster relief is not put at risk and that our cyber defense agency is fully operational. I offered a bill to get this done, to fund all of DHS except ICE, Border Patrol, and former Secretary Noem's office. But last week, after spending the entire week talking about how important these parts of DHS are, Senate Republicans blocked that bill. But I'm here today to give Republicans another opportunity to do the right thing and ask my Republican colleagues to put politics aside for a moment, work with us to get TSA and FEMA funded now, and press ahead to rein in ICE and Border Patrol. Mr. President, my colleagues know me. They know I will talk to anyone who is serious about getting results. But the problem right now, the reason we are here at an impasse is not because Democrats don't want a deal. That's ridiculous. It is not because we aren't willing to talk. I've been talking to my colleagues across the aisle all week. The problem is that Republicans are still refusing to agree to basic measures that we need to protect Americans' basic rights and their safety, the same measures we have been demanding for weeks as part of these negotiations. Look, this just isn't complicated. Democrats' position here is simple. We want reforms to rein in ICE and Border Patrol. We also want TSA and FEMA funded, but we are not going to be blackmailed into cutting a blank check for ICE to get it done. So I hope Republicans stop listening to Stephen Miller and start getting serious about reform, or at the very least stop blocking the funding for TSA and FEMA and Coast Guard and more while these negotiations on ICE and Border Patrol continue. So, Mr. President, notwithstanding Rule 22, I ask unanimous consent the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of my bill, it's at the desk, that the bill be considered read 3 times and passed, and the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Majority Leader.
Mr. President, reserving the right to object, I just heard the senator from Washington suggest that they're willing to sit down and talk with anybody at any time. But my understanding is there have been repeated overtures to the senator from Washington and other Senate Democrats from Republicans and the White House that have been rebuffed. Would the senator like to clarify her position on that? Because that's my understanding, and I think that that offer has been made repeatedly.
To the Majority Leader, thank you for asking that question, because I think it is really clear what's happened here. As the senator knows, during negotiations over the Christmas break, when everybody else was out doing what they do, we did negotiate the Senate DHS bill with our House counterparts, repeatedly asked for some things, and were rebuffed every single time, overridden by the White House. So I am here today to remind everybody that you, Mr. Leader, that the leader spoke to all of us when we came to a disagreement on DHS and ICE funding, that the leader himself said that this negotiation was between the Democratic leaders, that would be Senator Schumer and Senator Jeffries, and the White House. So I appreciate talking to my colleagues. I have talked to a number of them about what they might or might not be willing to, but having my experience here, and I would guess the experience of a number of my colleagues, until we know that the White House is actually really, and not just a representative, but is really at the table, which is what I believe the majority leader asked for, those are not real negotiations. I am willing to talk to people, but I'm not willing to sit in a room, have coffee, give away a few things, and have Stephen Miller override whatever we all agreed to in a room until I have that commitment. I'm certain that I speak for our majority leader as well, and for for Leader Jeffries, that we need to know the White House is serious. It is what I've told my Republican colleagues every step of the way. When we have that, and we have the White House who seriously says to us, we believe there is a problem, we understand that, we do want to sit down at the highest levels, we'll all be there for that.
Mr. President, reclaiming my time, the situation to which I think the senator from Washington is referring is how we landed at the agreement on the DHS bill that we've been trying to vote on. Subsequently, Democrats walked away from that agreement. It was the White House, it was House Democrats, it was Senate Democrats, it was House Republicans, and it was Senate Republicans, all negotiated the original deal. The Democrats have more recently said that's not adequate. And so subsequent to that acknowledgement by the Democrats, there have been several now occasions where Republicans have offered to sit down and talk with Democrats, and there have been offers from the White House. And just to be clear, the latest offer between Senate Democrats and the White House, which is where the senator from Washington is suggesting this should reside, has come from the White House. I think it was somewhere on the order of about 12 or 13 days ago now. 13 days ago. And there's been no response from the Democrats to that latest offer. And subsequent to that, my colleague, senator from Alabama, and others have tried, by approaching the senator from Washington and other members of the Democrat caucus and leadership, to actually sit down and have a conversation about a path forward. And usually around here, in order to get a deal, there has to be a negotiation where the two sides sit down together. And my understanding is that has been completely rebuffed by the senator from Washington. And so we are here today and we are trying to close a deal that would reform the offer sheet from the White House.
So far.
And they have gone a lot farther than any Democrat I think was even possible. And so we have a situation here, Mr. President, where one side is trying to get a deal to open up the government, to get people back to work, to fund the programs and functions that are important to the national security of our country. And we have one side that's saying, we're not going to sit down and talk.
Wrong.
I don't know how you defend that, honestly.
Wrong.
I mean, this is a one-sided negotiation in which the White House has put forward a proposal. Senate Republicans have said repeatedly, we are prepared to sit down and talk with Senate Democrats, and Senate Democrats, and my understanding is, the senator from Washington has said, sorry, we're not ready to talk. We have a lot of people who are unemployed, a lot of programs that aren't being funded, a lot of functions that aren't being performed. And, Mr. President, they're important to our country's national security.
Mr. President.
Now, one other thing, Mr. President, I'm reclaiming my time.
Mr. President, this was actually my time.
Reclaiming my time. No, it's reserving the right to object. The other thing that has been offered repeatedly is a continuing resolution
Mr.
that
President,
would
ask
allow
for a
a
regular
sufficient
order.
amount of time
Mr. President,
to
ask for a
debate
regular
this until we
order.
actually get
The
it.
regular order is unanimous request. Is there objection?
Reserving the right to object.
Senator of Alabama.
Mr. President, I think you've seen the leader lay out exactly what's happening here. We have political games being played by our Democratic colleagues instead of putting the people of this nation first. Mr. President, what we've just seen put forth by the senator from Washington would effectively defund our law enforcement officers that are charged with keeping Americans safe. Look, we're not going back to the era of defund police. We're not doing it. It would also defund our border patrol, our customs protection. Look, catching and interdicting fentanyl has to be a top priority. Under the Biden administration, that was the leading cause of death between people ages 18 to 44. Under President Trump's leadership, fentanyl and overdose deaths are down over 24%. We're not going to go backwards. We're going to secure our border, we're going to enforce our laws, and we are going to stand with the people of this country. Mr. President, interestingly, what the senator from Washington has put forth actually undermines the people of her very state. Back in 2023, when the DHS bill passed out of committee, she had this to say: Washington's state economy depends on our ability to ensure goods and people can move through our ports and borders in an orderly and timely way. Our national security depends on the ability to do this while stopping threats like drug trafficking and fentanyl. This bill provides critical funding to stop the flow of fentanyl at its source at our borders and protect communities in Washington state and across our country. But today, she stands ready to defund the very people who make this happen. And take a look at what that would do, even in her home state. The land ports of entry are many. This is defunding the mission of the paycheck of the agriculture specialists at the Danville Port of Entry, working to stop the spread of disease and pests that are impacting our food supply. What she's standing here to do today is going to defund the mission of the officer at the Nighthawk Port of Entry, inspecting vehicles and cargo. What she stands here to do today is going to defund the import specialist at the Pacific Highway Port of Entry. She says, let's move forward without these people getting paychecks and missions, their mission funded, and today we say, no way.
Washington, Senator Washington is
Mr. President,
recognized.
regular order.
Go ahead.
Regular order is unanimous
And
consent
with that,
request.
I object.
Mr. President.
Objection is heard.
Mr.
Senator
President,
Washington.
Sorry, I was gonna.
Mr. President.
Senator Washington.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, with all due respect to the Republican leader, and I respect his sincerity in representing his side, I respect his sincerity in wanting to find a resolution here, but I need to correct him on one really critical thing. He talked about an agreement that was there and then went away. You know what happened, Mr. Leader? 2 murders. 2 murders of American citizens. My side was not going to stand down and say, oh, well, nothing happened. We were going to say something happened. And what we see is an out-of-control ICE and agency, and we are coming now at this critical time, because this critical moment happened, to ask for some reforms and accountability. That is exactly what happened. And Mr. President, we are here today to say we are willing to work on that section of Department of Homeland Security, which we obviously have a disagreement, and by the way, which I know none of my Republican colleagues have ever come out here and acknowledged what has happened to American citizens, and I can sit out here for 45 minutes and outline them. None of them has acknowledged that, so you can see our frustration in saying, let's fund the rest of Homeland. Our caucus is united on that. TSA, FEMA, CISA, and so much more. But we obviously have a disagreement and clearly an acknowledgement from the White House and the Republicans that reforms and accountability have to be part of funding for ICE. I would remind everyone, as Senator Peters said a few moments ago, there is considerable funds in the big, beautiful bill to continue to take care of what ICE is. I think it's so incredibly important, Mr. President, that the Republican leader, who I respect, and I understand he represents his side, but I would respectfully telling him that having a few members talk is not going to resolve a situation where we need an understanding and a clear understanding from the White House. He mentioned the offers that have been gone back and forth. There are continual conversations at that level. And I respect that, and I hope that our leaders continue to do that. That's critical. But we have to have that understanding. And that is where we are. This lies with the White House to make it very clear that someone is willing to negotiate with this, that understands what has happened in cities across our country, and in particular in Minneapolis, where 2 people were murdered. If we can hear those words, then I think we're on the way to coming to an understanding. But in the meantime, let's fund these agencies. That is what we are asking the Republicans to do with us today. And it is disconcerting to me that they continue to not hear what we are asking for. With that, Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President,
Majority Leader.
so what I just heard was that they're willing to sit down, and yet we have tried repeatedly to sit down with the senator from Washington and other Democrat leaders to negotiate a solution here. And we've even gone so far as to say that until we get that sort of a negotiation and hopefully a solution, that we would fund the government under a continuing resolution, which is done fairly routinely around here, to make sure that these important agencies get funded, these employees get paid, these functions of our government that deal with national security and homeland security actually get performed. And so I guess I'm at a loss as to why we continue to have a one-sided attempt it is, to actually sit down and solve this deal, and why we can't then at least fund these agencies with a continuing resolution until such time as we can. Now, again, I would point out that the latest offer on the table is from the White House. It is 13 days old. The Democrats have not responded to that, nor have they indicated any willingness whatsoever to sit down with our side and actually talk about how to resolve this. So you have 2 things here. You have a White House offer and a willingness by the White House to sit down and talk, an offer on paper with significant changes in the direction that the senator from Washington and others are asking for, and yet we are just being rebuffed at every turn, even to have a discussion or conversation. Honestly, I don't know how you get a deal without a negotiation. And to have a negotiation, you have to have 2 sides at the table. We have one side at the table. Republicans are at the table, willing, ready, able to make a deal with the White House, I might add. Senator from Washington talked about having the White House there, and obviously that's an important component of this because we have to get a bill signed into law. But there is an offer, 13 days old, which hasn't been responded to by Senate Democrats, and repeated attempts by Senate Republicans to sit down and actually have a discussion about this, and complete, utter block resistance. That's where this deal is.
Mr. President, Mr. President.
Majority Leader has the floor.
And Mr. President, I would yield to a question for the senator from Missouri.
May I inquire the Majority Leader?
Senator from Missouri.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just want to point out, we heard from the Appropriations Chairman that nobody's come out here and acknowledged anything that happened. Let me point out something that the Democrats have failed to acknowledge in all this. This toxic empathy that they have, that really what it means is they don't want our immigration laws enforced. And let me be clear, we are going to do nothing that kneecaps ICE's ability to enforce our immigration laws. Because there were no Democrats out here that wept or pointed out that Jocelyn Nungary, the 12-year-old girl who was kidnapped, raped, and murdered by 2 illegal aliens in 2024. There were no Democrats that expressed any compassion out here on the floor about Rachel Morin, an American mother who was ambushed, raped, and murdered by an illegal alien while she was on a hiking trail in Maryland. There was nobody out here talking about Laken Riley. Now, what we have heard from the new Democrat governor in Virginia is that they're going to be a sanctuary jurisdiction and they're not going to work with ICE. They're not going to actually, the guy who stabbed a woman to death at a bus stop, they're not going to let ICE know when that person is released from prison or jail. That's what this debate is about. So let me just sort of pull the veil back about what this really is. Joe Biden let 15 million people in here illegally. This question about deporting illegal immigrants was on the ballot. President Trump was not bashful about it. It was on the ballot, and the American people supported the idea that we're going to deport people. We were going to use our federal law enforcement to deport people. They don't like that. And so the way that they get at mass amnesty now is not passing a law, because they can't do that. It's by not enforcing our immigration laws. So their proposals are not about reform. Their proposals are making it impossible for ICE to do their jobs, and we're not doing that. So let me dispel you of any notion that our side is going to allow you to continue the chaos that has happened inside our country because you all let 15 million people in here illegally. Not going to happen. So the question I have for you as we have this inquiry is, it is unprecedented, the idea that we're having policy debates in appropriations bills. You've done an incredible job, Leader, of saying we're going to get back to regular order. We've done 11 out of 12 appropriations bills. And now, because the Democrats found their controversy of the week, they've moved on to other things, so I'm a little surprised they're still on this. But now they want to start pulling things out of appropriation bills. Pulling things out. And it's just untenable. It's untenable because, let me promise, you would never do this. If you were in charge right now, you would never allow us to isolate anything. You didn't even have appropriations bills on the floor. Chuck Schumer never let a single appropriation bill on the floor in my first 2 years here. So now we're actually working through the process. So the proposals that we've heard from the Democrats, whether it's on judicial warrants or the other issues, they know exactly what that means. It means they want to limit ICE's ability to do their jobs. And we're not doing that. So you can cry about it, you can whine about it, you lost an election over it. The White House has dealt with you in good faith. You want to prolong this until you get another incident. While your activists are on the street confronting ICE agents in sanctuary jurisdictions, hoping they get some viral moment, it's like we're done with that, okay? We're done with it. Your NGO networks, I know they're still active, they're still doing their thing, but the truth is, all of the incidents that you can really count on, that you can point to, that any confrontation happened with ICE agents are in sanctuary jurisdictions where they don't respond to 911 calls for ICE agents. They don't cooperate with ICE agents. It's very easy for an ICE agent to show up at a penitentiary or a jail or prison and get somebody and deport them. What's harder to do is when they show up in a community and they have to go get somebody out of a house with more people. And they know that is exactly the dynamic. So I guess the question is, have you ever seen anything like this? The lack of good faith. This is really about, and I just want to be clear, this isn't about some reform. This is their final stand in opposition to the will of the American people who voted for deportations. So I just think that this is ridiculous. And by the way, especially ridiculous coming from the appropriations chairwoman, who we finally have regular order on this floor. We finally are doing actual appropriations bills, and they want to hold it up. So just beware that when the shoe's on the other foot, we know the tactics. We know the tactics.
I appreciate the senator from Missouri making that point, and the response to his question is, I do believe that we have people who are tasked with an important job, and defunding them is not an option. And I think we all agree with that over here, and I would hope that some of our colleagues on the Democrat side would agree with that as well. Are there reforms that can be made? Yes. Some were included in the base bill, which this side agreed to and then walked away from, and I understand why. Don't get me wrong. But we're trying to sit down now, and the White House, I think, in good faith, has put forward what, to me, are fairly significant reforms. But we don't have, I said, a willing partner. And we obviously are not going to defund law enforcement in this country. That's not something we're going to do, which is why it's important that in the context of this conversation here, as we fund these other agencies under the Department of Homeland Security, that we also come to an agreement about how to fund Border Patrol, which does secure our southern border, and ICE, which enforces the law in this country. My understanding is the senator from Hawaii wants to enter into this.
Mr. President, thank you. I thank both.
Senator from Hawaii is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I thank the leader and Senator Langford for their deference and trying to turn this into a little bit more of a debate. I want to ask the leader if he'll yield to a question.
Certainly.
Oh, I'm sorry. Well, can I ask unanimous consent that we turn this into a colloquy between myself and the leader for 5 to 8 minutes?
Without objection.
Thank you. I think Senator Schmidt said it perfectly. We are actually not very close as it relates to the question of ICE funding. And he made that crystal clear. I won't repeat his words. They were forceful. They were not conciliatory. And he said essentially, we'll be damned if we adopt those Democrats' demands. And so what's been happening is the White House and Democrats in Congress have been trading paper, submitting offers back and forth, and it was relatively professional. But on substance, we are actually as far apart as Senator Schmidt is describing. We are not that close. And so if everybody agrees on that we're not that close, that it's not like negotiations have shut down, but they're a little stalled. These things sometimes stall. And sometimes they pick up again, and sometimes they stall. And sometimes you're trading offers every 6 to 12 hours, and sometimes you're trading offers every 6 to 12 days. It doesn't mean a negotiation is not happening. It means it's happening as we transmit legislative text from one party to the other. The idea that the only way we can convey that we are negotiating is with a meeting in person is like literally not the way this place works. There are a million ways to negotiate. Sometimes you negotiate live fire drill, Senate floor. Sometimes it's in the cloakroom. Sometimes it's in the leader's office. Sometimes it's in committee. Sometimes it's by email. We are in a negotiation. However, we are not close. So if you stipulate to that, then the question is, what the hell do we do about the Coast Guard? In the meantime, you think we're going to cut a deal tonight to reopen those portions of DHS? There's nobody in Congress, staff, journalist, citizen, member, who thinks we can cut a deal in time to fund the Coast Guard, the TSA, CISA, and FEMA. And so we can continue this negotiation about ICE, and we should. And if someone's got a complaint about what manner we use, what modality we use to have that negotiation, fine. But that's actually a separate question from, in the meantime, TSA is going to miss paychecks. In the meantime, our cybersecurity function at the Department of Homeland Security has a lapse in appropriations. In the meantime, the Coast Guard has a lapse in appropriations. In the meantime, FEMA has a lapse in appropriations. So all we are asking is to say, we continue to disagree about this one relatively narrow thing. We've already funded 96% of the government. Let's fund another increment of the government to keep everybody safe. Let's just do that while we continue these negotiations. And the real answer on the Republican side to why they don't want to do that is they think that once we fund those other agencies that the Democrats will walk away from this negotiation about ICE. And my view is we really shouldn't keep the Coast Guard or TSA or FEMA or cybersecurity hostage while we continue to disagree about this. The question of whether or not we fund these agencies is very, very time sensitive. And so that's why we're pushing for this. This is not an unreasonable, and one of the things that's weird to me is in another world, in this same context, you could actually see a bunch of Republicans coming to the floor and say, why don't we fund this? Why don't we fund that? These UCs to fund different portions of the government are a tool that both parties have used. But we're in a very unique situation where there's some danger And so I would just like to understand the leader's thought process, and the senator from Alabama and the chairman of the Ethics Committee. Why in the world wouldn't we just fund the stuff that we all want to get funded and then keep arguing about the thing that we're arguing about?
Which is precisely what the senator from Alabama is going to attempt to do here momentarily. And what she's going to suggest is that we fund the government under a continuing resolution to allow additional time to negotiate. And that has now been objected to on multiple occasions by our friends on the other side of the aisle. But that, to me, is something that we have done routinely around here, repeatedly around here, to allow additional time to negotiate until we can finally land what I hope would be a deal that could fund all of DHS and not individual components or pieces of it. And so I don't know why anybody would object to that. If you are sincere in trying to get a deal, why you would object to funding the government for some foreseeable time into the future. We did do it for 2 weeks, which you guys all knew wouldn't be enough time. But if we funded it for whatever that is, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, to allow this negotiation to continue, at least these agencies are functioning. We have tried repeatedly to do that. And you have consistently, the Democrats, I should say, have consistently objected to that. So I think what you're asking, I'd say to the senator from Hawaii, is precisely what the senator from Alabama is going to propound in the form of a unanimous consent request, and that is to fund those agencies to allow this negotiation to continue. And again, I think, I don't know how you can be more good faith, at least the particulars that I've seen in the latest proposal that's put forward by the White House had a number of issues addressed in there that I think were important to the Democrats, and it would seem to me at least that if there's not an interest in agreeing to that latest offer, that there be some counter offer made, or we sit down and talk about that offer. And I think that's been offered up by Senate Republicans as well as by the White House. So I hear what the senator from Hawaii is saying, and I think that's exactly what we're saying right now and what we're trying to do.
Mr. President, just 1 minute through the chair with your permission.
Senator Hawaii.
I understand what the leader's saying. I understand what the senator from Alabama is proposing. But I think what the vice chair of appropriations said should not be glossed over as some sort of talking point. If you're trying to understand why in this particular situation we don't have the votes to provide for a 1-week CR, for a 3-week CR, for any funding for ICE, it actually is that Americans have been killed by an agency that now has more funding than most militaries around the world, more funding than the United States Marine Corps. And you may think this is some issue that we think we're going to turn to our political advantage, but I promise you, when we saw Renee Good and Alex Preddy killed, this became an issue that was beyond politics. And there are a lot of us who are not going to provide resources to this agency that is acting in such a way that makes citizens of the United States so unsafe. I yield the floor.
Senator of Oklahoma.
President, thank you. I appreciate the colloquy and the dialogue here on this issue because this is an important issue. We got to break through this logjam. We have people across the country that are TSA, that are Coast Guard, that are cybersecurity professionals, that are FEMA professionals, that are, yes, ICE professionals, that are Homeland Security, Customs professionals, that are doing a job they need to get paid for. And right now they're not getting paid because my Democratic colleagues are blocking their pay. And they've been very clear on this. And if I can reiterate what my colleague just said my Democratic colleagues do not want to fund ICE. The concern from so many Republicans are they want to be able to pass, Democrats want to be able to pass a bill right now that funds Homeland Security except for ICE, except for CBP. That means they want to cut off funding and basically drain it out and have folks go to their workplace every day but not get paid week after week, so eventually they quit. And no longer can ICE function, and no longer can Border Patrol function. That's the concern here, is that you're right. As has been stated on this floor just 2 minutes ago, they don't want to fund those entities at all. So What it seems like my Democratic colleagues are pursuing is a way to be able to fund everything else and to be able to starve out what they don't want. They don't want border protection. They don't want ICE removal. But can I remind my colleagues and anyone else who wants to hear it, what they're blocking funding for currently right now is more than just deportations. Even what they're proposing right now to say we'll fund everything else but ICE, but CBP. They're blocking out Homeland Security investigators. That is federal law enforcement that goes after drug cartels, weapons smuggling, money laundering, soliciting. That is the HSI are the folks that are actually going after child exploitation. These are the federal agents that go after human trafficking networks. These are the individuals that actually enforce the counterproliferation and sanctions enforcement. These are the folks that investigate the cyber crimes. So they're saying we're defunding ICE. They're also defunding the investigations for human trafficking, for drug smuggling, for cyber crimes, workforce investigations. They're also blocking out the customs professionals that are actually at our ports of entry, handling our produce, keeping different diseases from coming into our country based on soil samples and agricultural pieces that are coming in. That's what they're also defunding. And they're saying to Republicans, just give up. Just don't fund our customs professionals. Just don't fund the ICE professionals. Just don't fund them. We don't plan on ever paying them, so they'll quit. I think that's a terrible idea. Because help me understand the moment when we get back together and then my Democratic colleagues suddenly say, we've changed our mind, now we want to fund ICE. It's not going to happen. I saw during the Biden administration, up close and personal, they do not want to fund border protection. I saw it. The American people do want to have sane border policy. We do want to have sane enforcement. Now, just to do a little history in here, 13 days ago, the White House sent over a proposal, and it wasn't just a secret. The President of the United States posted on social media and made it very clear. These are the things that he is willing to be able to make the change on that Democrats have asked for, and now 2 weeks later, they're still saying, we're thinking about it. Why? Because it's good politics to say, we're still thinking about it. What are the things that they actually asked for, that the president came out and made a public social media post saying these are the things that we will do? He came out immediately and said, we will do a full investigation of the 2 American citizens that died. Full public investigation of that. Made that very clear. Pulled out of a surge that had happened in Minnesota. The president said under good faith, we're going to pull out entirely from that. The president then said, we're going to do body-worn cameras, make sure that they're all required. That's what Democrats were asking for. The president's already agreed to on that. Has already sent a dollar amount over with the requirement on that. The president already came out and publicly made a statement where Democrats said, we want identification on every federal agent. The president came out and said, I will agree to putting identification on every single agent. That's all been agreed to. There was also a statement made by Democrats that they would not, ICE agents would not go into what they call, quote unquote, sensitive sites to do arrest. The president already came out and said, we're not going to go into sensitive sites except for one. One of the demands that was made was ICE could not go into a polling place. Of all things, help me understand why someone illegally present should be in a polling place. But Democrats demanded that ICE agents not go into polling places, which, by the way, is why we want to bring the Save America Act up next week. The president said, no, I won't agree on a polling place because someone not legally present shouldn't be there in the first place. The president came out and said, I will agree to de-escalation training. All those things have already been agreed to 13 days ago. 13 days ago. And now because of good politics, the White House just has to sit and wait, I guess, and TSA agents get paid when they feel like it, and in the meantime, the strategy to try to just not pay ICE agents indefinitely until they quit continues to linger. So no, let's fund DHS. There's lots of agreements that the White House has already announced publicly that they want to do on this. They've been sending paperwork over. They've been sending legislative language over. And so far, it has been radio silence. So let's actually solve this problem. This is a room full of grown-ups. Let's have the grown-up conversation, whether it's on this floor or off this floor. But the last thing that we should do is leave this place and not have this thing resolved. Last